comic books, punk music, Nick Woolsey. There's a lot of things that have made me the artist that I am today, and today I would like to share some of those things with you. Drex here from Drex Factor Poi, sharing with you the love of poi spinning and flow arts to benefit your body and brain. And today I wanted to talk a little about the art that has made it possible for me to be an artist. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to the friends of the channel. Big thanks to Dark Monk, Flow Fests, Flow Toys, Pyroterra Light Toys, LMF Props, Spinballs, and Ultra Poi for helping to make the videos on this channel possible. You can learn more about all these amazing companies and the work they're doing to support flow artists like yourself by checking out the links that I've got down in the description of this video. So I had kind of a weird thought experiment a couple of weeks ago, which was to challenge myself to look at all of the art that I surround myself with and try and think about what impact it's had on me as an artist and more specifically on my poi spinning. And some of the answers that I came up with were pretty surprising to me and caused me to kind of go back in my head and look at my entire history with different types of art and how they've impacted me and kind of cross-pollinated to other different forms of art that I've been involved in. So now I want to take you all through some of the big bullet points there, both to help you understand who I am as an artist and why I create the art that I do, but also to see if it helps you as an artist understand where your influences come from. So to start things off, I'm going to say that one of the biggest influences on me as an artist in any medium, ironically enough, is comic books. I first got into comic books when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and they continue to be something that I absolutely love, and they've had an enormous impact on me, not just as a visual artist, but also as a movement artist. Among the things that I've noticed have had a huge impact on me and are now things that are kind of a fixture in my own art are being drawn to bold contrasts. That is, the difference between like very, very deep darks and very bright lights. And in addition, anybody who has ever seen me dance will know that I'm drawn to really powerful shapes, and sometimes think of those shapes as being unique moments in time rather than part of a series of movements or part of momentum and everything. Some of the artists that have really influenced me within the comic book world include Jim Lee, who drew the first comic book that I ever read. In particular, I really love how Jim Lee creates really bold poses and character movements. There's a kind of almost abstraction to the way that he creates his figures, where he centers them around very, very simple shapes, but they get expressed in very, very exaggerated ways through his anatomy. Another comic book creator I'm really drawn to is the work of Neil Gaiman. Reading The Sandman as a teenager was one of the most eye-opening literature experiences I have ever had. In addition to the kind of dreamlike reality that Neil Gaiman explores in his work, I also love the fact that he really uses fantasy as a lens for exploring big ideas, both within the realm of philosophy as well as individual people's lives and everything. That has a lot in common with like classical Star Trek as being a way that we can experience finding answers to these questions vicariously in an environment that feels safe to do so. Another comic creator whose works I really love is Alan Moore, and specifically reading Watchmen later on in my teen years had a huge impact on me. Overall, I love how Alan Moore's works explore moral gray areas and investigate the idea that perhaps nobody is completely a good guy and nobody's completely a bad guy. You know, sometimes it's just competing interests. I will also say that I've always really been drawn to the ways that he looks at the idea of heroes and really fundamentally asks the question of what is a hero, and is being a hero just simply a matter of perspective? And finally, I think Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud is one of the most important books of any medium that I've ever read in my life. In addition to being one of the most informative treatises on the art of comic books that anyone has ever written, I'm also going to say that the way he talks about the artistic process in his chapter called The 6 Steps is perhaps one of the most important ideas and deconstructions of the artistic process I've ever seen. To this day, I enjoy going back and rereading that chapter, not only to see where I was in my own artistic journey when I first started reading that book, but also where I'm at today. So next up, let's talk visual art. So in addition to comic books, in my teen years, I got super into classical art, and specifically the neoclassicist school of painters that emerged in France around the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. If there was one artist in this movement that really just shook me to my core, it would have to be Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. Ingres had this amazing ability to reflect reality without turning it into iconography, which there are so many other painters that I've seen that even when they're documenting everyday life, try to turn it into iconography. And there's something about letting something that is relatively plain stay relatively plain that I think Ingres had a really unique talent for. In addition, I love how minimalist many of his portraits are. That is, so many other portrait artists will try to cram the frame with as much iconography as they possibly can, with as many pieces of texture or as many references as they possibly can to try and elaborate on the character of the person that they're painting. Ingres was legendary for having these almost blank frames outside of his subjects, where basically the subject itself was the only thing there really was to see. Could that have any connections to somebody who creates videos where the backdrop is meant to be so plain that your focus is entirely on the movement of the boy? No, that's got to be a coincidence. Another classical artist whose work I really admire is Monet. So originally I was kind of a punk and I hated Impressionism. Like when I got into the neoclassicist school when I was in high school and everything, I was so incredibly focused on just trying to create something that more or less replicated reality. And the fact that the Impressionists had begun to throw out elements of reality and try to convey other ideas through art was something that I found kind of backwards or lazy. And Monet was the artist that convinced me that I was wrong. Specifically, there was a painting of Monet's that I encountered in a poster store that is a painting of his wife, Madame Monet, with their son, just sitting on a hilltop on a windy day. There was something about this painting that just made something click in my head, and all of a sudden I saw the Impressionist canvases differently. I saw these bold uses of color and these ways that you could abstract the everyday while still making it recognizable. And, you know, as a kind of fun full circle, when I moved to DC, I remember one of the first times that I visited the National Gallery of Art, I turned a corner and discovered that very painting. I didn't know that it lived in DC until after I moved here. Another Impressionist whose works I absolutely love is Renoir. In Renoir's case, I think that the use of colors is even more bold and intense maybe than even in Monet's paintings. And like the works of Monet, and for that matter Neil Gaiman, there's a certain dreamlike quality that he infuses into the everyday, somewhat abstracting it while at the same time still making it recognizable. And there's something about the tension of those two ideas that I find really, really, really engaging. So we have talked a lot about visual arts. Now let's dive into some not so visual arts. First up, music. And I'm going to say that when it comes to music, probably the two biggest influences on me are the metal and punk genres, specifically because they provided an outlet for me to kind of explore a lot of the angst that I felt growing up, while at the same time doing it in a way that felt constructive and healthy. I will also say that the DIY ethos of punk was a huge influence on me in every art that I've ever pursued, including YouTube. You know, the ability to shoot, edit, you know, compose, and just everything related to putting together videos and everything is definitely something that comes about as a result of my feeling like, you know, I was able to, thanks to that punk background. So without a doubt, the first band that ever made an impact on me was The Who. To this day, Baba O'Riley, I think, is probably the greatest song I've ever heard in my life, and would probably be my pick for the greatest rock song ever written. The Who managed this incredible tightrope walk between talking about big ideas on a massive canvas. They basically invented arena rock, while at the same time having these very quiet, sad, and intimate ballads that really felt like you were connecting directly with another human being. I love that contrast, and I love the fact that they were playing with such big feelings, whether they happened to be in a huge environment or a small one. You know, I think we go through those cycles a lot in our own lives. Another band that had a huge influence on me growing up, Queen. Wow, so you want to talk about painting on a big canvas. I don't think it gets any bigger than this band. And again, this is one of those bands that I feel like just played around with incredibly big feelings. Probably my favorite Queen song would have to be Under Pressure, and I love how it goes through these moments of intense vulnerability, and then you have this crashing bridge where all of a sudden we're in hard rock land and we're exploring our angst and we're exploring our anger and everything before coming right back to that very vulnerable place at the end. Like, most bands struggle to give justice to even one of those emotions, and Queen and David Bowie did it all in under 5 minutes. That's astonishing to me. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the formative musical acts of my teen and adult years. Probably the biggest influence on me musically as a teenager, like just in terms of art in general, and when I started playing music myself, would be the Smashing Pumpkins. And we're going to stick an asterisk up front here because as a teenager, I didn't know what a colossal douchebag Billy Corgan was. That's only become abundantly obvious to me in the past few years. I still enjoy the Smashing Pumpkins music, but it is definitely tainted by the fact that the guy who was writing it is just such an awful human being. That said, like the work of Neil Gaiman and like some of the Impressionists that I was talking about, I love the dreamlike quality to the Pumpkins' work. Specifically, they kind of got me into shoegaze and the neo-psychedelia movement and everything. I love the textures that they work with and the massive canvas of sound that you hear in all their recordings and everything. Plus which, there was just something interesting about this contemplative and yet still aggressive kind of music and all of these big emotions living side by side. For a teenager who was wrestling with some pretty intense feels, this was music for wrestling through some pretty intense feels. And next up, a band that I feel like became more of a long-term influence, Green Day. So I just loved Green Day's attitude, the way that they rejected authority, and the way that they tried to turn everything into a joke. In addition, the simplicity and minimalism of their music made music feel more attainable. It made me believe that I could create music. Like, it's not any coincidence that when I first started learning how to play guitar, I started off by learning Green Day songs. Plus which, while the Smashing Pumpkins are a great soundtrack for exploring angst and depression and everything, I don't feel like they quite captured the aggression that I felt as a teenager and sometimes as an adult, quite like Green Day does. You know, there is something to be said about, you know, turning that adrenaline rush into something that's kind of fun and bouncy. In a way, I kind of feel like listening to them was a way of converting energy that didn't really have an outlet into something that could be fun and creative and contribute to the world around me. Wow, so wouldn't you know it, this turned out to be a much bigger topic than I was going to be able to fit into just one video, so it is now a two-parter. Tune in next week to find out the rest of the art that influenced me. Please make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe so that other people can find this video and hopefully learn something from it. And of course, a huge thank you because this video would not be possible without the kind contributions of these amazing folks right here. These are my Flow patrons on Patreon. They, as well as the people listed down in the description, are my supporters and make this video and all the videos on this channel possible. If you'd like to sign up to support the work that I do, and no pressure, but if you'd like to, head on over to patreon.com/DrexFactorPoi and sign up. You can get early access to all of my content as well as a say in what topics I tackle in the future. Plus, there's some great behind-the-scenes stuff that I upload there on occasion and some extras as well. Go and check that out. Please and thank you.